In the grim darkness of the far future, few worlds hold the significance of Cadia. Positioned at the nexus of the Imperium's struggle against the endless tides of chaos, Cadia stood as the sentinel of the Cadian Gate, one of the few stable passages through the roiling tempest of the Eye of Terror. For millennia it endured, a fortress world manned by soldiers of unyielding discipline, whose mere existence was a testament to humanity's defiance against annihilation. The fall of Cadia was not merely a military loss. It was a moment of unparalleled catastrophe that rippled through the Imperium, sending shockwaves of despair, chaos, and uncertainty. Yet, this was not a simple tale of conquest. The destruction of Cadia raises a profound question. Was its fall truly unavoidable, or did the threads of fate intertwine with choices, ambitions, and missteps to weave its downfall? To approach this question, we must step back and consider the monumental forces at play. This is a tale of towering ambitions and devastating failures, where mortals and demigods clashed in the shadow of an eternal war. It is a story that intertwines the unrelenting march of chaos, the faltering unity of the Imperium, and the untold sacrifices of countless souls who gave their lives to keep humanity's light burning. Cadia's fall represents not just the loss of a world, but the collapse of a bulwark against chaos, a shift in the balance of power that reshaped the galaxy itself. To understand how this came to be, we must first examine the players involved, their motives, and the events that led to this pivotal moment in the history of Warhammer 40,000. In this journey, we will explore not only the grand strategies and brutal conflicts, but also the deeper mysteries, unanswered questions, and profound consequences that have shaped the Imperium in the wake of Cadia's destruction. What sacrifices were made, what errors committed, and what cosmic forces conspired to bring about this tragedy? The answers, as we shall see, are as complex as they are haunting. Now let us venture deeper into this saga, beginning with the forces and figures whose actions defined the fate of Cadia. The key players in this drama await our scrutiny. The destruction of Cadia was defined by the convergence of immense forces from across the galaxy, each with distinct motivations and capabilities. The event brought together some of the most powerful factions and individuals in the galaxy, each playing a pivotal role in the unfolding drama. On the side of the defenders stood the Imperium of Man, represented primarily by the Astra Militarum, also known as the Imperial Guard. Among these were the famed Cadian shock troopers, soldiers renowned for their discipline, expertise, and unparalleled familiarity with warfare on their homeworld. Cadia's defenders were supported by numerous regiments from other worlds, each bringing their own unique tactics and strategies to bolster the desperate defense. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the technologically devout sect of the Imperium, played a significant supporting role, lending their arcane knowledge and machines of war to the effort. Their titans, massive war engines that tower over the battlefield, brought a terrifying level of firepower to the defenders. Skitari legions, cybernetic warriors of the Mechanicus, were also present, their unflinching precision a stark contrast to the chaotic fury they opposed. Alongside these forces, the Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's genetically enhanced warriors, arrived to reinforce Cadia. Several Space Marine chapters deployed forces to the battle, each driven by their unyielding loyalty to the Imperium and a grim determination to hold the line. Their power armor-clad warriors and advanced weaponry were critical in stemming the overwhelming tides of their adversaries, even if their numbers were limited compared to the massed ranks of the Guard. The Sisters of Battle, the militant arm of the Adepta Sororitas, also played their part in the defense. Their faith-fueled zeal and unwavering resolve made them fierce combatants against the forces of chaos, their bolters and flamers a symbol of divine wrath unleashed on the enemies of humanity. In orbit above Cadia, the Imperial Navy waged its own war, battling to maintain control of space lanes and protect the planet from orbital bombardments. Massive warships, bristling with weaponry, clashed against Chaos fleets in an apocalyptic ballet of destruction, seeking to hold the enemy at bay as long as possible. Opposing the defenders was the unrelenting force of Chaos, embodied by the Black Legion and its innumerable allies. The Black Legion, led by its infamous warlord, was the spearhead of the assault. These warriors, once among the most loyal servants of the Emperor, had long since turned to the service of the ruinous powers. Clad in black and gold, they were a living reminder of the Imperium's ancient betrayal and a relentless force of devastation. The forces of Chaos were not limited to the Black Legion. Other war bands, each serving one of the 4 Chaos gods, lent their strength to the assault. Each brought their own twisted methods of warfare, from the bloodthirsty berserkers of one patron to the plague-infested monstrosities of another. Together, they represented an unholy alliance of hatred and ambition, united only by their shared desire to see Cadia fall. Demons surged forth from the Eye of Terror, their numbers bolstered by the rift's proximity. These unnatural beings, manifestations of the warp, added an unpredictable and horrifying element to the battle. They attacked with frenzied abandon, their otherworldly forms defying the logic of reality and striking terror into the hearts of their foes. The Chaos forces also included traitor regiments of the Astra Militarum, known as the Lost and the Damned. These once loyal soldiers had turned against the Imperium, their ranks swollen by heretics and cultists drawn to the dark promises of Chaos. Their familiarity with Imperial tactics and weaponry made them a dangerous adversary, capable of exploiting the weaknesses of their former comrades. Adding to the Chaos forces' strength were the dark machinations of the traitor titans, warped versions of the Imperial war engines. These massive constructs, corrupted by the warp, matched their loyalist counterparts in power and brought devastation to the battlefield with each thundering step. This was not merely a clash of arms, but a collision of ideologies, faiths, and ambitions. On one side stood the Imperium, fighting to protect a world that symbolized humanity's resilience against Chaos. On the other was an alliance of darkness, united by a singular purpose: to break the Imperium's hold on the Cadian Gate and plunge the galaxy into deeper turmoil. Each side brought everything it had to the conflict, shaping the fate of Cadia and the galaxy beyond. The destruction of Cadia was not an isolated event, but the culmination of millennia of warfare, betrayal, and unrelenting pressure from the forces of Chaos. The planet's fate was forged by a chain of events and circumstances that positioned it as the last bulwark of resistance against the tide spilling from the Eye of Terror. The Eye of Terror itself had long been the epicenter of chaos within the galaxy, a roiling warp storm where the immaterial and material worlds overlapped. This unnatural phenomenon had given rise to countless incursions, invasions, and horrors that spilled into the galaxy. For millennia, the Imperium's response to these threats revolved around containing this malignant force, and Cadia, located at the gateway to this storm, became the linchpin of the Imperium's defensive strategy. The Great Crusade had pushed the boundaries of human dominance across the galaxy, yet in its aftermath, the Imperium's control began to falter. Fragmentation, civil war, and external threats gradually wore down the unified strength needed to hold the line. The traitorous rebellion that tore apart the Imperium in its early years inflicted wounds so deep that many systems never fully recovered, leaving strategic gaps that would later prove catastrophic. Other key fortress worlds and systems meant to share the burden of containing chaos gradually fell to internal strife, external invasion, or subversion. Some worlds succumbed to heresy, their populations swayed by whispers of forbidden power. Others were simply overwhelmed by the endless tides of war. As the centuries wore on, these losses placed ever-growing pressure on the Cadian Gate, forcing its defenders to bear the brunt of every major assault from the Eye of Terror. The Imperium's rigid bureaucratic structures and fragmented communication networks compounded the problem. Reinforcements and resources were often delayed, diverted, or lost entirely. The vast distances of the galaxy and the unreliability of warp travel meant that even when aid was sent, it often arrived too late to make a meaningful difference. Each failed response left another link in the chain of defenses broken, drawing the noose ever tighter around Cadia. Compounding these issues were the ambitions of Chaos itself. The ruinous powers had long sought to expand their dominion beyond the Eye of Terror. While their alliances were often fraught with infighting and betrayal, their shared desire to see the Imperium fall drove them to coordinate their efforts at key moments. Over time, they amassed a growing arsenal of resources, both physical and metaphysical, that allowed them to launch increasingly devastating assaults. The weakening of the Cadian Gate's neighboring systems also created an inevitable shift in the region's defensive focus. As other strategic points fell, Cadia absorbed the displaced military assets and personnel, transforming it into an even more heavily fortified world. While this centralization of power and resources made Cadia a near impenetrable bastion, it also made it a single point of failure. The loss of neighboring support systems meant that if Cadia were ever to fall, there would be little to stop chaos from spilling forth into the wider galaxy. The broader instability of the Imperium further exacerbated the situation. Civil unrest, religious strife, and Xenos incursions drained the Imperium's resources and attention, diverting its focus from the looming threat of chaos. While Cadia stood resolute, the Imperium's ability to provide meaningful aid waned, leaving its defenders increasingly isolated against an enemy that only grew stronger. In the centuries leading up to the event, Chaos forces tested the Imperium's resolve with smaller incursions, probing weaknesses and wearing down the defenders. Each attack left scars, both physical and psychological, that accumulated over time. The Imperium's inability to decisively eliminate these threats allowed Chaos to gain a foothold, steadily eroding the defenses that surrounded Cadia and pushing the battle closer to its gates. Perhaps most damning of all was the lack of foresight from the Imperium's leadership. The unyielding dogma of its rulers often prevented adaptive strategies that might have stemmed the tide. Opportunities to bolster other systems or launch preemptive strikes were dismissed, and internal politics frequently stifled meaningful action. These failures were not merely tactical but systemic, creating an environment in which the fall of Cadia became increasingly likely. The stage for Cadia's destruction was thus set long before the final assault. The planet stood alone as the last remaining bastion against the chaos spilling from the Eye of Terror, not because it was the only fortress capable of holding the line, but because every other option had already crumbled. The fall of Cadia was not the result of a single event or decision, but the culmination of centuries of pressure, failure, and inevitability that brought the galaxy to this defining moment. The final days of Cadia were marked by relentless conflict, a crescendo of violence that engulfed the planet in an all-encompassing war. As the forces of chaos poured forth from the Eye of Terror, the defenders of Cadia mounted a desperate resistance, transforming the world into a battleground that would decide the fate of the Imperium's northern reaches. The assault began with the arrival of the Chaos Armada, a sprawling fleet that blackened the void above Cadia. The ships of chaos came in waves, their jagged forms brimming with heretical energy, escorted by corrupted constructs and supported by a tide of demonic entities. The Imperial Navy scrambled to meet the attack, forming defensive patterns around the planet's orbit to intercept the invaders. The ensuing void battle was a cataclysmic engagement, with countless vessels reduced to debris, their remnants falling as fiery streaks into Cadia's atmosphere. On the planet's surface, the defenders braced for the inevitable ground assault. The Cadian shock troopers, alongside regiments from across the Astra Militarum, manned the fortress cities and defensive lines that crisscrossed the planet. Each bastion had been meticulously prepared, with gun emplacements, trenches, and shielded bunkers designed to withstand even the most determined assaults. The defenders' discipline and training allowed them to hold firm against the initial bombardments, which turned vast swaths of the planet into smoldering wastelands. The Chaos forces struck with unrelenting fury, their war bands spilling onto the surface in a frenzy of bloodshed. Twisted cultists and traitor guardsmen surged forward, their numbers seemingly endless, crashing against the Imperial lines like waves against a cliff. Behind them came the corrupted machines of war, demon engines, possessed tanks, and the towering forms of traitor titans. Each step of these monstrous constructs was a hammer blow against the defenders, forcing the Imperium's forces to adapt and retaliate. To counter these overwhelming odds, reinforcements arrived from various factions of the Imperium. Space Marine chapters deployed elite strike teams to Cadia, their warriors striking hard and fast to stem the Chaos advance. These superhuman soldiers targeted key Chaos leaders and war engines, sowing disruption among the invaders and giving the beleaguered defenders much-needed respite. Their presence galvanized the troops of the Astra Militarum, whose morale had begun to waver under the relentless pressure. Above the battlefield, aerial engagements raged as Imperial aircraft and Chaos flyers clashed for dominance of the skies. Thunderbolts, Valkyries, and Marauder bombers struck at Chaos landing zones, while Hell Talons and Helldrakes wreaked havoc on Imperial positions. These battles were no less brutal than those on the ground, with the skies over Cadia streaked with the flaming wreckage of downed craft. As the Chaos forces pressed their assault, Cadia's defenders employed every resource at their disposal. Orbital defense platforms and planetary shield generators provided crucial support, repelling some of the enemy's heaviest bombardments. The Adeptus Mechanicus contributed their own forces, deploying cybernetic Skitarii legions and their massive titans to counter the traitor war engines. The clash of these colossal machines was a terrifying spectacle, their battles reshaping the landscape with every volley of firepower. Despite their efforts, the defenders were forced to retreat from some of Cadia's outer defenses as the Chaos forces concentrated their attacks. The traitors' advance was bolstered by dark rituals, which summoned demonic reinforcements onto the battlefield. These unholy entities tore through Imperial ranks, their presence a terrifying reminder of the stakes of the conflict. The defenders adapted with grim determination, using faith and discipline to hold the line, even as the odds grew increasingly dire. One of the most significant moments in the battle came when Chaos forces managed to breach Cadia's defensive bastions, engaging in brutal urban warfare within the planet's fortress cities. The streets became killing grounds, with defenders fighting room by room to delay the enemy's advance. Every block gained by the Chaos forces was paid for in blood, but the sheer weight of their numbers made the outcome seem inevitable. Throughout this relentless campaign, acts of heroism and sacrifice defined the defenders' resistance. Imperial commanders made hard decisions to hold key positions at any cost, sacrificing entire regiments to buy time for the rest of the defense. Chaos warlords unleashed nightmarish tactics, corrupting the very ground beneath their enemies' feet and calling forth waves of warp-born horrors. In the end, the forces of Chaos succeeded in pushing the defenders back to Cadia's final bastions. The battle had become a grim war of attrition, with both sides suffering catastrophic losses. Yet, even as the situation became increasingly hopeless, the defenders of Cadia refused to yield, embodying the Imperium's unrelenting spirit. The war for Cadia had reached its zenith, a clash of titanic proportions that would decide the fate of the planet, and perhaps the galaxy itself. The moment of Cadia's fall was not a singular strike or a gradual erosion. It was a cataclysmic event that shattered the planet's resilience in an instant. After years of holding the line against the tides of chaos, Cadia's defenders were brought low not by the strength of their enemies alone, but by the culmination of dark machinations that exploited the very fabric of the galaxy itself. The event that sealed Cadia's fate began when Chaos forces unleashed their most devastating weapon, the Blackstone Fortress. These ancient moon-sized constructs, long shrouded in mystery, had been corrupted by the powers of Chaos and repurposed into tools of unimaginable destruction. The final blow came as these massive fortresses converged upon Cadia, their combined presence amplifying the raw energies of the warp. The planet's planetary shield generators, which had held firm against countless bombardments, were the first to succumb. These massive constructs had been a cornerstone of Cadia's defenses, their energy fields repelling even the most concentrated assaults. Yet, the sheer power unleashed by the corrupted Blackstone fortresses overwhelmed their capabilities. The shields flickered, strained, and finally collapsed in a cascade of energy that left the planet vulnerable to the full fury of the Chaos onslaught. With the shields down, Chaos forces intensified their attack. Orbital strikes from corrupted ships rained destruction upon Cadia's surface, targeting its fortress cities and strategic installations with pinpoint precision. Simultaneously, demonic forces surged forward, exploiting the gaps in the defenders' lines to wreak havoc. The combination of these assaults left Cadia's defenders with little room to maneuver, their positions rapidly being overrun despite their desperate efforts to hold the line. Amid this chaos, the most devastating blow came not from an enemy weapon, but from the instability of the planet itself. The concentrated warp energy surrounding Cadia, amplified by the Blackstone fortresses, caused catastrophic tectonic upheavals. The ground split apart, cities crumbled into chasms, and entire regions were swallowed by violent earthquakes. The once stable world that had endured millennia of war was being torn asunder by forces beyond comprehension. The defenders of Cadia, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, refused to surrender. The Astra Militarum and their allies fought to the bitter end, rallying around the remaining strongholds that still stood amidst the devastation. Yet, the collapse of the planet's infrastructure and the relentless advance of Chaos forces made their resistance increasingly untenable. One by one, the strongholds fell, their defenders overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the assault. The final moments of Cadia were marked by an act of grim defiance. As the planet broke apart under the strain of the warp energies unleashed by the Blackstone fortresses, Imperial forces enacted a desperate plan to evacuate as many survivors as possible. Massive evacuation efforts were launched, with ships risking destruction in the chaotic void above Cadia to rescue the last remnants of its defenders. This effort was not without cost, as many of these ships were destroyed by Chaos forces or consumed by the planet's unraveling gravitational forces. The destruction of Cadia reached its climax when the planet's core, destabilized by the immense warp energies coursing through it, finally gave way. In a moment of unimaginable violence, the planet was ripped apart, its remnants scattered into the void. The Cadian Gate, the Imperium's last line of defense against the Eye of Terror, had fallen. This catastrophic event left the galaxy forever changed. The Imperium had lost more than just a world. It had lost a symbol of its resilience, a bastion that had stood as a bulwark against chaos for millennia. The question of whether Cadia's fall was truly unavoidable would haunt the Imperium, but in the final moments of its destruction, one truth remained. Cadia stood until the very end. Its defenders had given everything in the fight, embodying the unyielding spirit of the Imperium, even as their world crumbled beneath them. The destruction of Cadia sent shockwaves through the galaxy, altering the course of history for the Imperium and every other faction embroiled in the endless conflict of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The fall of this fortress world had repercussions far beyond the battlefield, destabilizing entire sectors and shaking the foundations of the Imperium's already tenuous grip on survival. One of the most immediate consequences was the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum, a massive rift that tore through the galaxy, dividing it into two distinct halves. This warp storm, born from the cataclysmic energies unleashed during Cadia's destruction, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the galaxy, became severed from Terra, its worlds cut off from the Emperor's guiding light. Without the Astronomicon to navigate the warp, travel and communication across these regions became perilously unreliable, plunging countless systems into isolation. The fall of Cadia also had a profound psychological impact. For millennia, the Imperium had regarded Cadia as an unassailable bastion, a symbol of humanity's defiance against chaos. Its destruction shattered this illusion of invincibility, casting doubt on the Imperium's ability to withstand the growing threats it faced. On countless worlds, fear and despair took hold, leading to widespread civil unrest, rebellion, and heresy. The loss of such a symbol emboldened enemies of the Imperium, from heretics to Xenos empires, who saw this moment as an opportunity to strike. Strategically, the loss of Cadia marked a catastrophic blow to the Imperium's defenses. The Cadian Gate, the most stable and defensible route out of the Eye of Terror, was no longer a functional barrier. With the planet gone, Chaos forces had an open corridor to spill into the galaxy with unprecedented ease. Subsequent invasions became far more difficult to repel, as the Imperium scrambled to reorganize its defenses without the linchpin that had held the line for so long. The material losses were equally staggering. Cadia had been a hub for the deployment of military resources, from Astra Militarum regiments to naval fleets and Mechanicus war engines. Its loss disrupted supply chains and left critical gaps in the Imperium's logistical infrastructure. The thousands of regiments stationed on Cadia were decimated, leaving gaping holes in the Astra Militarum's ability to respond to other threats across the galaxy. The destruction of the planet's infrastructure meant that even the survivors could not be easily redeployed, as the effort to evacuate them had left many stranded or scattered. For humanity, the destruction of Cadia meant an escalation in suffering and hardship. The regions once protected by the planet's presence faced chaos incursions with little warning or defense. Worlds that had previously relied on the Cadian Gate as a buffer were overwhelmed, their populations enslaved, corrupted, or annihilated. Refugees from these worlds flooded into neighboring systems, straining resources and spreading tales of horror that further destabilized the Imperium's control. Despite the devastation, the question of whether Cadia's destruction was truly unavoidable lingers. Many argue that the planet's fall was the result of centuries of systemic failures within the Imperium. The bureaucratic inefficiency, inflexible doctrine, and inability to adapt to emerging threats left Cadia isolated in its final hours. The reluctance of the Imperium's leadership to commit sufficient reinforcements in time, coupled with the disorganized state of its military, ensured that the defenders were outmatched when the final assault came. Some even point to the Imperium's reliance on Cadia as a crutch, arguing that the over-centralization of its defenses on a single world made its fall inevitable. Others contend that the destruction of Cadia was the result of forces beyond mortal control. The sheer power of the warp, the dark designs of chaos, and the ancient technologies wielded by the enemy created a scenario that no amount of preparation could have fully countered. In this view, Cadia's destruction was not a failure of the Imperium, but a grim inevitability in a galaxy dominated by powers far greater than humanity. In the aftermath of Cadia's fall, the galaxy stands on the precipice of chaos. The Imperium has been forced to adapt, establishing new defensive strategies and attempting to rebuild its shattered strength. However, the scars of this loss run deep, and the memory of Cadia's destruction serves as a haunting reminder of the Imperium's vulnerability. For every soldier, citizen, or leader who reflects on the fate of Cadia, the question remains: could it have been saved, or was its destruction always written in the stars? The destruction of Cadia has sparked intense debate and fascination within the Warhammer 40,000 community, with fans dissecting every detail to uncover the unique and controversial aspects of this pivotal event. One of the most frequently discussed topics is the role of the Blackstone fortresses and their mysterious origins. These colossal structures, remnants of a forgotten age, were corrupted by chaos and wielded as weapons of unimaginable power. Their manipulation to amplify warp energies and destabilize the very fabric of reality raises intriguing questions about their purpose, their creators, and whether their existence predestined Cadia's fall. The enigmatic nature of the pylons scattered across Cadia's surface is another point of fascination. These ancient structures, predating even humanity's colonization of the planet, were believed to suppress the influence of the warp. Their origins are tied to an era lost to history, possibly connected to the ancient enemies of chaos. During the final moments of Cadia, the pylons were targeted by chaos forces, suggesting that their destruction was a key factor in unleashing the full power of the warp. Fans often debate whether these pylons represented the galaxy's best hope for resisting chaos, and whether their preservation could have changed the course of history. Another unique aspect is the interplay of faith and technology in the defense of Cadia. The defenders relied heavily on both, with the Astra Militarum and Adeptus Mechanicus bringing technological ingenuity to the battlefield, while the Sisters of Battle and other factions fought with a faith-driven resolve. This blending of pragmatism and religious fervor highlighted the duality of the Imperium's approach to warfare. Some argue that the over-reliance on dogma stifled innovation that could have turned the tide, while others view the spiritual unity of the defenders as a vital factor in their prolonged resistance. The arrival of certain key reinforcements during the battle also generates significant discussion. The deployment of elite forces, such as certain Space Marine chapters and renowned individuals, is often examined for its impact. While their contributions were heroic, many question whether these forces arrived too late to make a decisive difference. The timing and scale of these interventions have led some to speculate about the bureaucratic inefficiencies and political rivalries within the Imperium that delayed critical aid. The use of chaos-corrupted artifacts and strategies by the invaders introduces a dark and compelling element to the story. Fans often debate the ethical implications and risks associated with the Imperium's occasional willingness to study or utilize similar technologies in other conflicts. The contrast between the defenders' strict adherence to the Imperial Creed and the invaders' unrestrained exploitation of ancient forbidden power adds a layer of complexity to the narrative. The event also raises questions about the broader cosmic forces at play. Some fans argue that Cadia's fall was not solely the result of military decisions or ancient technologies, but part of a larger predestined struggle within the galaxy. The influence of the warp, the interference of higher powers, and the cyclical nature of destruction and rebirth in the galaxy are all themes that resonate deeply within the Warhammer 40,000 lore. These debates often touch on the philosophical question of whether mortal actions can ever truly shape the outcome of such titanic struggles. Finally, the cultural and symbolic significance of Cadia has made its destruction a subject of lasting fascination. The phrase "Cadia stands" became a rallying cry not only for the planet's defenders, but for the entire Imperium, embodying a spirit of defiance against insurmountable odds. Even in its final moments, Cadia's fall was marked by acts of heroism that ensured its legacy would endure. Fans often reflect on how this legacy continues to inspire other characters and factions within the lore, highlighting the enduring impact of the planet's sacrifice. These unique aspects of Cadia's destruction continue to fuel discussion, ensuring that this event remains a cornerstone of Warhammer 40,000's rich and ever-expanding narrative. The unanswered questions and deeper mysteries surrounding the battle invite fans to explore the event from new angles, keeping its story alive and evolving within the community. The destruction of Cadia was not simply the result of overwhelming force, but a consequence of pivotal actions and decisions by key individuals. These figures, both among the defenders and the attackers, shaped the outcome of the conflict through their strengths, weaknesses, and choices. On both sides, personalities emerged whose influence was decisive in the planet's ultimate fate. One of the most debated figures in the fall of Cadia is the leadership within the Imperium itself. The fragmented nature of the Imperium's chain of command and the inefficiency of its bureaucracy are often cited as critical weaknesses. The inability to send reinforcements in time, coordinate a unified response, or fully comprehend the scale of the threat were failures that cannot be attributed to a single individual, but to a collective failing among the Imperium's leaders. This systemic inertia allowed chaos forces to exploit vulnerabilities that might have otherwise been addressed. However, some blame rests with the strategic decisions made by the commanders on the ground. Although the Cadian shock troopers and their allied regiments fought valiantly, Certain defensive choices and tactical errors are often scrutinized. Overcommitment to holding certain areas while neglecting others, reliance on outdated strategies, and an underestimation of the enemy's capabilities contributed to the eventual collapse. The defenders' resolve was unmatched, but resolve alone could not overcome the logistical and strategic disadvantages they faced. On the side of chaos, one individual stands out as the architect of Cadia's destruction. The warlord leading the assault embodied the relentless ambition and unholy power of the ruinous powers. This figure's mastery of both martial and psychological warfare made them a singularly devastating opponent. Their strategy of uniting disparate chaos warbands and deploying the Blackstone fortresses demonstrated a deep understanding of the Imperium's weaknesses and the overwhelming force required to exploit them. This warlord's ruthlessness and cunning were matched only by their raw power. They were not merely a leader, but a symbol of chaos itself, inspiring terror and awe among their followers. Their ability to harness the destructive potential of the warp, combined with their coordination of corrupted forces, created a perfect storm that overwhelmed even the most disciplined defenders. Yet, their strength was not without flaws. The warlord's reliance on the volatile nature of chaos often led to infighting among their ranks, a factor the defenders occasionally exploited to gain temporary reprieve. Another critical player was the individual responsible for commanding the corrupted Blackstone fortresses. This figure's role was instrumental in the final assault, as they oversaw the deployment of these ancient and devastating constructs. Their deep understanding of the warp and their ability to manipulate the fortress's energies to catastrophic effect made them a key asset to chaos. However, their single-minded focus on destruction also left them vulnerable to miscalculations. Their overconfidence in the fortress's power led to moments where their attention could have been exploited had the defenders possessed the means to counter their influence. One of the most tragic aspects of the fall of Cadia is the role of misplaced faith and loyalty among the defenders. Certain individuals within the Imperium held to dogmatic beliefs that blinded them to the scale of the threat they faced. These figures, often elevated to positions of authority due to their piety rather than their competence, made decisions that hampered the defense. Their reluctance to adapt or accept unconventional strategies allowed chaos forces to gain critical advantages. On the other side, chaos was bolstered by its own charismatic and malevolent leaders. One such individual, a master of dark rituals, played a pivotal role in summoning demonic reinforcements and amplifying the warp energies that destabilized the planet. This figure's actions directly contributed to the breakdown of Cadia's defenses, as their unholy rites tore through the barriers that had held chaos at bay for millennia. Their ambition and disregard for their own followers' lives made them a relentless force, but their reliance on the unpredictable nature of the warp was also a potential liability. Ultimately, the destruction of Cadia was the result of a combination of strengths and flaws on both sides. Among the defenders, courage and loyalty were undermined by inflexibility and systemic failures. Among the attackers, raw power and cunning overcame moments of internal discord and unpredictability. The individuals involved were not just pawns in a larger conflict, but central figures whose actions and decisions shaped one of the most pivotal events in the history of the galaxy. The destruction of Cadia left behind a trail of mysteries and unanswered questions that continue to fuel debates within the Warhammer 40,000 universe. As one of the most pivotal events in Imperial history, the circumstances surrounding its fall remain a source of speculation, theory, and intrigue, with many questioning whether it was an inevitable outcome or if different choices could have altered the galaxy's fate. One of the most hotly debated topics revolves around the enigmatic pylons scattered across Cadia's surface. These ancient structures, believed to suppress the influence of the warp, played a central role in stabilizing the region around the Eye of Terror. Their origins remain unknown, though some theorize they were created by a long-lost civilization with knowledge far surpassing that of the Imperium. Were the pylons intended solely to contain the Eye of Terror, or did they serve a greater purpose that was never fully realized? Some even question whether the Imperium's limited understanding of these constructs prevented their proper use, potentially dooming Cadia from the outset. A related mystery involves the Blackstone fortresses and their interaction with the pylons. Fans and scholars alike have speculated on whether the corrupted fortresses amplified the warp energies to the point of destabilizing Cadia, or if their use was part of a deliberate strategy by Chaos to neutralize the pylons. Could the Imperium have better defended against these weapons had they fully understood their function? Or were these ancient constructs simply too powerful to counter with existing technology? Another enduring question concerns the leadership of the Imperium during the final stages of Cadia's defense. Many have speculated on whether political rivalries and internal corruption within the Imperium's upper echelons delayed critical reinforcements or prevented decisive action. Did the High Lords of Terra underestimate the scale of the threat, or was Cadia's fate deemed an acceptable sacrifice in the larger strategic picture? The lack of transparency and the labyrinthine nature of imperial politics make it nearly impossible to discern whether negligence, miscommunication, or deliberate inaction played a role in the planet's downfall. The presence of certain individuals during the battle also raises intriguing questions. Some claim that powerful figures within the Imperium might have acted differently or arrived earlier to alter the outcome. Were there opportunities to rally stronger forces to Cadia's defense, or were these potential allies too preoccupied with their own conflicts to intervene? Similarly, the motives of key Chaos leaders remain unclear. Was Cadia chosen as a target purely for its strategic value, or did its destruction serve some greater, more sinister purpose beyond mortal comprehension? The role of the warp itself is another point of contention. The destruction of Cadia was intrinsically tied to the unpredictable and malevolent nature of the warp, leaving some to question whether mortal actions could ever have truly prevented its fall. Was the collapse of the planet a foregone conclusion due to the sheer power of Chaos, or did specific actions tip the balance? Some theorists suggest that the warp's influence extended even to the minds of Imperial commanders, subtly manipulating decisions to ensure Chaos's victory. Another area of speculation concerns the aftermath of Cadia's destruction and the creation of the Cicatrix Maledictum. This massive rift in reality has profoundly altered the galaxy, splitting the Imperium in two and plunging countless worlds into darkness. Could the pylons have been used to stabilize this rift had they survived, or was their destruction an unavoidable step in Chaos's plan? Additionally, some question whether the rift's creation was an unintended side effect or a deliberate outcome orchestrated by higher powers within the warp. Finally, the cultural and symbolic impact of Cadia's fall invites its own set of theories. For millennia, Cadia stood as a symbol of imperial resilience, and its destruction shattered the morale of countless imperial citizens. Yet, even in its fall, Cadia's legacy endures, with the phrase "Cadia stands" becoming a rallying cry for those who continue to fight against Chaos. Did this symbolic defiance play a role in the Imperium's subsequent recovery efforts, or did it serve as a convenient narrative to mask deeper systemic failures? The destruction of Cadia is far more than a historical event. It is a labyrinth of mysteries and unresolved questions that continue to shape the galaxy. Whether these enigmas will ever be fully unraveled remains uncertain, but their existence ensures that the fall of Cadia will be debated and studied for generations to come. The destruction of Cadia reshaped the galaxy in profound ways, with consequences that continue to reverberate through the Imperium and beyond. The fall of this fortress world not only marked a turning point in the war against Chaos, but also served as a grim reminder of the Imperium's fragility. However, debates persist about whether Cadia's fall was truly unavoidable and what might have transpired had the planet endured. If Cadia had somehow survived, the course of galactic history would have been drastically different. As the anchor of the Imperium's defenses around the Eye of Terror, Cadia represented the single most important barrier against the forces of chaos. Its continued existence would have denied chaos the opportunity to spread as rapidly as it did following the planet's destruction. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the immense warp rift that now divides the galaxy, might never have formed, preserving stability across vast regions of the Imperium. A surviving Cadia would have ensured the continuation of the Cadian Gate as a choke point for chaos incursions. This bottleneck allowed Imperial forces to concentrate their defenses, preventing chaos fleets and armies from spreading unchecked. With Cadia still standing, the Imperium could have maintained its ability to monitor and suppress warp activity near the Eye of Terror, preserving vital systems and minimizing the loss of strategic worlds. The psychological impact of Cadia's survival would have been equally significant. The Imperium thrives on symbols, and Cadia's resilience had long been a source of inspiration. Its continued defiance would have bolstered morale across the galaxy, reaffirming the belief that humanity could stand against chaos. The fall of Cadia shattered this illusion, plunging countless systems into despair. A world that endured against overwhelming odds might have galvanized the Imperium's citizens and military, fostering greater unity and determination in the face of growing threats. From a military perspective, a standing Cadia would have preserved vital infrastructure, regiments, and resources essential for the defense of the Imperium. The loss of the planet forced the Imperium to divert forces to plug the gaps left by its absence, weakening defenses elsewhere and creating vulnerabilities that Xenos and Chaos forces exploited. Cadia's survival would have allowed the Imperium to concentrate its efforts on other critical fronts, potentially altering the balance of power in its wars against other enemies. Despite these potential outcomes, the question of whether Cadia could have realistically survived remains contentious. The forces arrayed against it were immense, and the Imperium's failure to reinforce the planet adequately suggests that its fall was, if not inevitable, then at least highly likely. The deployment of the Blackstone fortresses, the sheer scale of the Chaos invasion, and the collapse of the planet's infrastructure under warp energies created a perfect storm of destruction that few worlds could have withstood. Moreover, the systemic flaws within the Imperium, its bureaucratic inefficiencies, inflexible doctrines, and inability to adapt, contributed to Cadia's fall in ways that went beyond the battlefield. Even if Cadia had survived this assault, these weaknesses would likely have led to future vulnerabilities. The Imperium's over-reliance on Cadia as a linchpin of its defenses may have delayed the inevitable rather than prevented it. In the long term, Cadia's destruction forced the Imperium to adapt in ways it had long resisted. The establishment of new defensive strategies, the reorganization of fleets and armies, and the rise of new leaders willing to take bold action were all driven by the loss of Cadia. While these changes have come at a tremendous cost, they may ultimately strengthen the Imperium's ability to confront the myriad threats it faces. However, the loss of Cadia also solidified Chaos's dominance in the galaxy, granting its forces unprecedented freedom to operate. The split caused by the Cicatrix Maledictum has left the Imperium in a precarious position, struggling to hold its fractured domains together. Many worlds, now isolated in the Imperium Nihilus, face relentless incursions without hope of reinforcement, further weakening humanity's grip on the galaxy. Ultimately, the destruction of Cadia represents both a tragedy and a catalyst for change. While its survival could have preserved stability and morale, its fall has forced the Imperium to confront its vulnerabilities. Whether these adaptations will be enough to secure humanity's future remains uncertain, but the loss of Cadia serves as a stark reminder of the stakes in the eternal war against chaos. The question of what might have been lingers as an unsettling thought, but the reality of Cadia's fall continues to shape the galaxy in ways that will endure for millennia.